Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here. Welcome to the final lecture for the course. I'm thrilled. Sorry I'm so casual today. It's one of those really nice days out, so I've been outside working in the yard. But I came in to do some grading, and I wanted to put a video together for the final quiz in the course, which isn't too taxing. It's only 10 questions. It's 100 points. And it's comprehensive in the sense that all of the questions, except for two, have come out of chapters or have actually come out of quizzes that we've already taken. So let me do this. I'm going to go through and review them for you, and I'll let you know what the new ones are, and you should be good to go. The due date for the quiz is May the 1st at the end of the day. If you can get it done sooner, that would be a thrill because I could get the grades in sooner. But May the 1st is when you have to have it done by. So I'm going to go through the questions. I can't guarantee these are going to be in the same order, but the first question is about gender oppression. And I don't know if you remember or not, but when we talked about Asia and China, there was a question about foot binding. And so foot binding is really the symbol of gender oppression we're talking about here. I think that was from chapter 4, actually. Next, from chapter 7, we have another gender question. And the reason there's a couple of gender questions on here is because I think it's important, especially in this class, as we look back through history and we try to trace some of the roots of gender inequality, if you will. And also we're tracing the roots of ethnic difficulties and religious differences also. Gender's important in that same category. So the question out of chapter 7 is about the Frankish kingdom. So really think about all of those European kingdoms, and it talks about the patriarchal nature. All right, and it talks about in the Frankish kingdoms how women had certain rights, including the right to any property they brought to a marriage. It's an important question, or it's an important thing to try to remember, is because even back then, between the year 1000 and 1500, you're starting to see little bits and pieces of women's rights emerge. Now, obviously, they had a long way to go, but we start to see the beginning of them here, so I think it's an important question to have on the test because it's something we might remember. The next one was about the three religions. So we hopefully, if you didn't already know, the takeaway, the big three religions, the big monotheistic religions, Christianity. So we read about the beginnings of Christianity. We read about the beginnings of Islam and Judaism as well. So they all share the same God. This monotheistic, the Torah or the Bible and the other books that we read, they're all this monotheistic framework. So remember that. And this question is important to me because it kind of shows you, with all the battles between all the religions, that the three religions are really all very close together. They basically start in the same place. So something to think about. Next, we talk about the Native Americans, indigenous Americans, and I think that is chapter 10, I believe, and one of the questions is about this gap in the historical narrative, and the reason for the gap is the arrival of European diseases. So there is no history that was written by indigenous people or that was left behind by indigenous people after a certain period of time because of all the diseases from Europe that killed them because they had no natural immunity. So next time we talk about a pandemic, think about that. The next question comes out of chapter 5, and this is a really important one on a number of levels. So the question is about the history of ancient Greece provides us with a limited perspective of history because, and we had a couple of questions like this. In this case, the limited perspective of history about Greece comes from the fact that it's told by men. All right, so it leaves out the perspective of women, and the men that told these stories were all pretty much well off in the sense that, they could leave some sort of narrative behind, or at least someone cared enough to carry on their narrative. So just like anything else in history, and I would say anything else you listen to or read or watch on TV, you gotta think about the perspective, the person who's writing it, and what their framework and what their lens is. So that's why that's an important question. Question about ancient China. So the question is, what is a mandate of heaven? And the mandate of heaven is this idea that rulers, so this was in China, but it was true in Egypt and Mesopotamia and everywhere else, that rulers were somehow mandated to be king, by God, and the mandate from heaven. And for practical people like you and me, it's sort of an excuse rulers use to say, hey, we're different than you because God loves us. Well, it's all made up anyway, but the mandate of heaven is the term, or the term of art that they used in China for that idea that the king is part of divinity. Next, we're going to talk about the Sunni-Shia divide, and that is the dispute about who should succeed the Prophet Muhammad as the leader of the Islamic faith, and we read quite a little bit about that. So that's an easy question. We had a question about sustainability, and for ideas about sustainability and environmental issues, we had several chapters and several places in the text we could pick from, but I picked from Great Zimbabwe, from our chapter on Africa, the idea that population growth and using up of the forest is what happened to some of these Zimbabwe civilizations, or at least that's what people think. And so that's a question on the exam. We had another one like this where in Mesopotamia, the groundwater became, too salty over time. So that idea of sustainability was important in a couple of instances in the course. Moving on, we have this is a new question from Chapter 12. So Chapter 12 talked about the 1 through the 5th or 6th Crusades, and all I think we need to know about the Crusades, since this is really a survey course, is just broadly defined what were they. So that is the question on the final. Broadly defined, the Crusades can be viewed as what? And the answer is holy wars, because that's really what they were. They were really about Christian and Muslim power. I mean, you could argue they were territorial disputes. Don't get caught on the test, because that is a possible answer on the test. But the right answer is holy wars, because they were really more about religion. And I think we can justify that, especially when we look at Pope Urban. It was the popes that were reaching out to these different European kingdoms, saying, hey, put a bunch of people together, crusaders, and go beat up Muslims somewhere. So really, I think that's the justification for the holy war aspect. But I also think historically, it's really an important question to kind of know that religious disputes have been going on for a long time, and still are to some extent in some areas of the world. So I think it's important that we look to the past to figure out why we're at the spot we're at now. And lastly, on the exam is another new question, and it's one I didn't pay hardly any attention to in Chapter 12, but I think it's important. So, and I even put the section on the test question so you can look it up. But if you go to Chapter 12, Section 18.4, it talks about the Magna Carta, and that was a document that was signed in London, in England, actually in Runnymede, which is on the banks of the Thames, in 1215. And it's important because it was a document that basically telling the king, hey, you can't do whatever you want. Okay, so the gist of it was the king can't raise the taxes on the people without talking to a council of the people or the parliament first. And it's important because it's sort of this nascent beginning of some sort of democratic demands on the part of the people, although the council and the parliament were a bunch of elites anyway, and not really the people like you and me. But anyway, Magna Carta is important because it dictated that a king must consult the council or the parliament prior to raising taxes. It's an important document. It's an important idea. So that's the final exam. It's been great being with you guys all semester. If you ever need anything from me, I'm University of Toledo History Department. Reach out to me anytime. Dr. Dan, it's been great. Have a great day, you guys. Take care. Good luck.